Welcome to the 7 Minutes Podcast. We are returning with our second episode. Hope you enjoyed the first. Today we are talking ports, remakes, and remasters. And that's a big topic. It's a broad topic. But we have a structure. So
we have no structure. We have no structure whatsoever.
We have a handful of things we discussed prior to this, which we'll pretend is a structure.
Yeah. But hope you enjoy. I guess we can just jump right in.
Yeah, okay.
Should we remind everyone who we are?
Not a bad call.
Yeah, this is only episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am Angela, and I, among other things, am a marketing manager. And in my spare time, the things I really care about, marketing I don't care about, play a lot of games, and I write. I am a staff writer for Nintendojo.com, and I manage our Instagram account. And then I also do like fashion, blogging, and Instagram stuff. I have a gaming blog that I've neglected, so yeah, keep myself busy.
I am Zack. I am not a marketing manager, but I am engaged to one who may or may not be at this table. I play games and stuff. Just keep it general. I've been playing since, mid to late 80s and never stopped.
I'm Robert. I am the Attorney General of, actually, I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Nintendojo.com. I run our social, Twitter, Facebook, write stuff for the site. Huge Nintendo fan, though I do play everything, but Nintendo's my passion. And yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention I am the drug czar of Nintendojo.com.
The what?
The drug czar. It's another...
What the heck is that?
All right, that's a failed political joke. We can keep that in or edit it out.
Is this some kind of country with a dictatorship and?
No, the U.S. has had drug czars. It's like,
is Fauci the drug czar?
No. Well, this is anyhow.
Back to business.
Yeah.
All right, so, there are a lot of, let me just set the scene here and kind of like lay the groundwork for the scintillating conversation to come. There are a number of terms used to describe a number of different approaches to re-releases with some kind of marketing fanfare of already existing games.
Yes, remakes, remasters, HD versions, even HD versions of already HD games. Shout out to the compilations of PS3 titles that were already HD that are now more HD.
Yeah, is it more than just Shadow of the Colossus? Has happened multiple times? I
think there's been a few things now that were HD, like God of War 3. That was HD on PS3, but they remade that for PS4, and it was more HD.
All right. Well, maybe let's start with to go around and what game do you think of first when we talk about remasters or remakes?
I think the one that stands out, well, for me, there's two that stand out majorly in my mind. The first is Super Mario All-Stars on Super Nintendo. Because as a kid, it blew me away that they took the first 3 Mario games and gave us better graphics, and then gave us the, I can't believe there's a real Mario Bros. 2. I forget, what do they call them?
Lost Levels.
Lost Levels.
Yeah.
So that one, and then just something about the remake of Ocarina of Time on 3DS, that also is kind of burned into my mind in terms of did you say remasters or remakes?
There's a lot of terms flying fast and furious. If you want to talk about ports, whatever. We're wide open here. This is no judgment zone, except where Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks are concerned.
I think of A Link to the Past on Game Boy Advance. And, how, interestingly, we got Four Swords Adventures from that, which, it's not like the greatest Zelda game of all time, but I think Four Swords Adventures is a really great game.
To be clear, though, that was not the same Four Swords that appeared on GameCube. It did introduce the concept.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But, I understand that A Link to the Past, because I've never beaten A Link to the Past, either on the Super Nintendo or Game Boy Advance. But, I understand, they added some slightly different content. But I always thought it was really neat having this pretty big game, just in terms of like the actual size of the actual game, but also, this incredibly influential, amazing, important Zelda title in a small, portable form.
This is more on the...
Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing I want to add.
Yeah.
I also like that they redid the art, the original art from A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo. They redid that art.
They get rid of his pink hair.
No, not in-game sprite work, but the kind of concept art, promotional art.
Yeah.
I much prefer the new art style for the Game Boy Advance. I really don't. I actually don't care for the art style from the original Link to the Past. But the art style that they went with for the remake is really, really good. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Cool. So before I reveal my answer, say I just noticed that for all the games you're mentioning, there was a large amount of effort made to keep the game basically playing exactly as before. Obviously, in the case of Link to the Past, they added the whole Four Swords things to it, but in terms, they were trying to give you the experience of the Super Nintendo game on the GBA.
Mm-hmm.
Same with the Mario games and the Mario All-Stars collection and the 3D remake of Ocarina of Time too. The title that most stood out to me, not even one I necessarily like, but Twin Snakes, the remake of Metal Gear Solid for the GameCube, which is deliberately not faithful to the way Metal Gear Solid plays. It handles more like Metal Gear Solid 2. You have the ability to go into first-person mode to aim. I think it has that kind of more analog feeling to moving around, and just tries to bring an older game to feel more in line with a newer game, which is something you sometimes see with remakes or remasters of games. Like I said, I don't particularly like it, but for whatever reason, it stands out as maybe a formative experience of seeing a bold new re-envisioning of a game that already exists.
I have a lot of sentimental feelings for and nostalgia for Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, because I grew up with all the original Pokemon games, and I was working at GameStop at the time. That those games were re-released on the DS, and the excitement for those re-releases, man, customers were coming in talking about it, pre-ordering, and especially too because those games came with two little statues. I actually have those of Lugia and Ho-Oh, and just I can't really remember in my time at GameStop any other Pokemon game garnering that much excitement. We had a line almost out the door for those two games. Part of it was driven by the excitement for those little figurines, but also too just the excitement of, man, Gold and Silver have been remade. And I just remember, standing behind the counter and, people, my coworkers on the phone calling other stores saying, "Do you have any extra figurines?" Trying to send people to other stores. And those games are great. Those remakes are great. Gold and Silver are just great games, but yeah, and a lot of attachment to those.
I think Angela kind of touched on this a minute ago when she was saying that seeing A Link to the Past turned into this portable experience where it's on the little screen in your hand, you can take it everywhere. What's fascinating is, as I'm thinking about this topic, is that there's an evolution to the remake. Because really, when you get to Super Mario All-Stars, it's not that far removed from Mario Bros. 3. But yet, already Nintendo's at that point where they're looking back and thinking, so if we made this now, what would we do with it? Mm-hmm. And you get this kind of reinterpretation of the visuals of Mario Bros. 3, because it more or less feels the same in terms of its like mechanics and physics. But, you know, as time goes by, the remake evolves, because then it's like, well, what if you go beyond just changing the graphics? What if we're changing whole chunks of gameplay? And then that's where, with like a Twin Snakes, it's like, so we created this whole engine for Metal Gear Solid 2, where you can put people in lockers and do this and that. Well, what if we incorporated that into the original blueprint of Metal Gear, the original Metal Gear Solid? And so it's just kind of this endless tinkering, and like sometimes making giant changes is good, sometimes it's not. I mean, Pokemon at this point, if you think about it, red, blue, green, you know, however you want to look at it, red and blue, red and green, whatever. Mm-hmm. Those were remade on Game Boy Advance. You had Fire Red and Leaf Green.
Oh,
now,
yes.
We'll probably get into this at some point during this podcast, but being authentic to the experience, I mean, I will play something that was on Game Boy and still enjoy it. But I can admit that with Fire Red and Leaf Green, that they took, you know, what they had done in those first games, melded them with Ruby and Sapphire, and created these incredible versions of those first two titles. Now, you would think, well, now we're going to take these two games again and go back to the well with the, the ones that just came out, not Hey You, Pikachu.
Let's Go.
Yeah, the two Let's Go games. Those are technically, again, remakes of the original Pokemon games, and yet those were more polarizing. Even though visually they're arguably superior to like the Game Boy Advance games, you have the reworked mechanics where you're not battling out in the field, you're just catching Pokemon.
I don't even know if I'd call those remakes. I'm sure like you could make the argument for it, but that's like saying that like Super Castlevania 4 is a remake of the original Castlevania. Which...
Well, according to Nintendo and the Pokemon Company, those are supposed to be reinterpretations of the first two Pokemon games.
I think,
sure, but that's what I mean with Super Castlevania 4, which is also like the story of Simon Belmont being Dracula.
Right, I think reinterpretation is a good word to use for the Let's Go games. Thank you for reminding me, Robert, of Leaf Green and Fire Red, because Leaf Green is just one of my favorite games of all time. I spent so much time in high school on Leaf Green. I spent a lot of lunches with my Game Boy Micro. My friends are talking and we're all hanging out, but I'm just sitting there playing Leaf Green. I love that game so much. I have a lot of good memories attached to it. It makes me think of high school. In fact, I think my high school, I think Leaf Green was one of the games that my high school boyfriend wanted to borrow. He had asked me if he could borrow it, and I was like, no. He wanted to borrow a couple of games, and I was like, no, sorry.
Was that high school for you? Was it middle school?
No, that was high school.
Because I remember going. Do you remember going to Toys R Us to get Mew?
No.
Yep, we went to Toys R Us, and I think Ruby and Sapphire might have been my first Pokemon games, because I don't remember if I mentioned this in the last podcast or not, but Angela loved Pokemon from the beginning, and I'm about 4.5 years older than her, and I just thought Pokemon was too cutesy at first. I was like, I'm not a fan, but she watched the cartoon every single day after school, and so we had one TV in the house, so that's what it would be on. I'd be watching it with her. Eventually, I was just like, all right, I like this. Enough pretending I don't. So I came aboard in the Game Boy Advance era, and so either Ruby and Sapphire or Fire Red and Leaf Green, I can't remember which one I tried first, but I just remember having Leaf Green and Fire Red going to Toys R Us, and the workers had to sit there with us. I think they used link cables, and they gave us cards. I believe I wasn't collecting the cards at the time, because I think I probably gave you whatever I had gotten, but I remember getting Mew on, I don't remember if it was both games or one game, and I just know that I kind of don't ever want to fire those two games up again, because I'm like, For one thing, I don't want to see if the battery has died.
Mm-hmm.
And then for another, I'm thinking if I ever replay it, I might have to just buy new copies because I don't ever want to lose Mew.
Yeah.
Because I'll never get him back again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if he's been lost, he's already been lost, whether you turn the game on or not.
It's Schrodinger's Mew. I'd rather not know for sure if he's dead or alive.
To make a small correction, Robert, you are correct that Leaf Green came out when I was in, I think, the 8th grade, but I didn't start putting time into it until high school.
Because I was thinking of the timelines. I'm like, I thought it would have been already DS by that time.
Yeah, but no, you're right. I'm looking at my phone. Apparently, Leaf Green was released January 29th, 2004, which would have been, like my 8th grade year, like January of my 8th grade year. I would have already.
So you mentioned earlier describing like an evolution or like a progression in the way that remakes or whatever are handled. And I don't know if it has really been, because you think even back to like say Capcom games that were contemporaries of Mario All-Stars, and you still saw like in UN Squadron, for example, which was an arcade game that got ported to the Super Nintendo. They were reconfiguring what stages to include, what I think in the original arcade game you don't get to pick your plane, and in the Super Nintendo game you can actually like save up money as you're playing through to buy new planes, like adding some like RPG mechanics and things like that. I think it's just always been kind of a spectrum of techniques that are used. Well,
I know we started this off by saying ports and remakes, but really, even that there's differences, because if you're, look at the people at Konami who had to take the arcade Turtle games and, specifically they took, so the second Ninja Turtle game on NES is the first arcade game.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like, you're porting it, but it's like you're porting it and it's such a massive difference in terms of power that it's almost a completely different game. And then you get to like the Super Nintendo version of Turtles in Time, and I actually think the Super Nintendo version is superior to the arcade one, but the mindset of the porting team at that point, they're on a different mission than, let's say, the people who had to port Crash Bandicoot 4 to Switch. Because for that, it's like, well, how do we get it optimized on Switch without losing too much? But they're not really changing anything about it. Whereas,
I think that's more like the porting of Turtles in Time to Super Nintendo, honestly. Like, the porting of the Ninja Turtles arcade game to the NES is like, obviously the hardware is just so incapable of rendering, like, frankly, what a lot of people found appealing about the arcade game, which is like 4-player action with gorgeous graphics, right? And the Ninja Turtle NES game is 2-player action, and like the sprites were larger than average, but it's not like a super good looking game, Well, what I'm saying is it's that mentality, because it's like if you're taking UN Squadron from the arcade and you're putting it on Super Nintendo, it's a lot different than the mental process of we're going to take Ocarina of Time and now we're going to put it on 3DS, and that whole kind of mission that they were on. Like it's different headspaces. But then bear with me a little bit. Maybe like paint this like in a little more detail, because to me, like the Ocarina of Time 3D remake seems like a pretty, like, it's not that they made no changes, but like they didn't really make fundamental changes to the game except like small quality of life changes.
Well, let me clarify what I'm trying to get at. I kind of look at it in terms of like the progression of remakes and all that. It's sort of like video game graphics, where you go from the 2D pixel stuff and then you get to the 3D era. And when the N64 and PlayStation and Saturn, whatever, when those hit the market, you have now I know we talked about this before, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just thinking of the games we played here in America. You have a very strong transition from 2D to 3D, and 2D is largely just relegated to it's on the handhelds, and then everybody's working in the 3D space for years. It isn't until you get to Xbox 360 and PS3 that suddenly 2D games come back into vogue. And what happened in my mind at that point is there was this mentality of, well, like 2D was just archaic. Now it's 3D. Like, we've gone from this thing to this new thing. The old thing is an old thing, and it's just gone now or irrelevant. But by the time you get to PS3 360, suddenly developers are realizing, you know what? Those 2D games are actually, they're just their own thing. And even pixel graphics are their own thing. It's like styles of art. So like doing a 2D pixel game, we'll say it's a retro aesthetic. Well, you can do a painting and say I'm doing an abstract painting. I'm doing a super realistic painting. You start getting a different approach to development.
So how does any of this connect to UN Squadron or the Turtles NES game?
So I'm thinking in terms of like remakes. Like with Nintendo, when you go back again to Mario All-Stars and they're working on that quartet of games, Nintendo largely was just like, give them better graphics, leave the gameplay alone. And really, what's the roadmap for that other than maybe like the million different conversions of Pac-Man from the 70s into the 80s? Really, like what Nintendo's doing at that point by remaking their own work is they're once again kind of pioneering something that becomes a larger part of the industry, because remakes...
I don't think that's true. I really don't. Like the kind of like graphical work you're talking about did not start with Mario All-Stars. You can find examples on like from various like PCs moving from one PC to another, or right, because like you think about like, you know, I think with like CGA versus VGA graphics, and like games did get like converted from like, I think I got those acronyms right, from like, you know, the ones with like some graphics and computers look, they're just like, you know, cyan, yellow, like 16 ugly colors. And then there's like full 256 colors and remade for like different target hardware and like try and like, you know, gussy it up, pretty it up when it comes to that hardware. That was like an established thing that you could do with video games before the Super Nintendo came out.
But was it more a thing of, I don't know, I'm thinking of the artistry behind it. Like if you're working on, you know, this remake of Mario All-Stars, like you don't have to do it. Like if you're going from, like I have to make multiple SKUs of the same game because there's 10 different consoles on the market. Again, like the Atari era, where it's like, well, I'm going to port Pac-Man to the Atari, and then this, and then that, and then that, and then this. And you end up with like multiple different versions of that game. Like if you read, so I'm going to shout out to something that I hope the readers, if you love old games, go find a copy. Retro Gamer Magazine's amazing. It's a UK publication. They go through all sorts of old games from every system you can think of. They've done features on like the multiple different versions of Pac-Man that are out there.
Sure.
And it's astounding because it's like seeing not just the different interpretations based on the particular coder, but then the limitations of the hardware. But that was also a matter of, we have all these different systems, we have to put Pac-Man out. Whereas with Nintendo, they could have been like, we made these 3 Mario games for the old NES, now we're just moving on to the new Mario games. But when they did All-Stars, it was kind of this real intentional act of, you know, we're not remaking this for a new SKU because, like, the same attitude of, like, Pac-Man however many years ago. We just want to take in celebration of... Because I think it came out on an anniversary, didn't it?
Who knows?
Well,
Sure.
I just feel like Nintendo sitting and making that game, it was a little different than what came before. It was more like, this is this thing we made, and we're reinterpreting it now, and there's a sort of just like... I don't know, I'm having trouble putting into words what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So I think, let me try and take a stab at what you're saying. Ports and remakes very early on seemed more almost utilitarian. Almost like we sort of have to do this. It's just a smart business move. Going from one version of the Atari to the other and the other. You know, Pac-Man is a great seller. Why wouldn't we port Pac-Man onto the next version of the system? So they do it. Whereas, and especially too with Nintendo's mentality of constantly chasing newness, because it really had not been very long between the release of Mario, the original Mario 2, Mario 3. I think the American Mario Bros. 2 is on that collection, right?
Yeah.
It had not been that long between the release of those 4 games and All-Stars on the Super Nintendo. They didn't have to do it. They could have just said, we're moving on. I can't remember if, Mario World was already out by that point. So they didn't have to do that collection. They just did it for the sake of paying homage to their own work.
And I mean, clearly to make money too. But,
of course,
But I don't think that's
I was going to say too, they also added in, the feature of how each game has those save files. And you can save and quit in ways that you couldn't before. So, unlike previous games that had been remade, that were mainly just kind of marketing schemes, taking money makers and bringing them onto the new versions of the consoles, Mario All-Stars feels different because it really didn't have to be done. It had not been that long since they had come out on the previous consoles, and it really felt more like this is just kind of, we love these games and we know players love these games, and we'll just add some new graphics and give you a collection.
Yeah, I think you guys are just inclined to see a kind of historical significance to things that Nintendo does.
That wasn't me. That was me trying to.
I think you were inclined to see historical significance of things that Nintendo does and see them as unique in ways that they're frankly not. Like, how is this different than Ys 1 and 2, starting on the, I think it was the PC 8800, and then getting a remake, however you want to put it, on the TurboGrafx with Red Book quality audio and adding cinema scenes and things like that, where it's clear this is a smash hit. I think for a long time Ys was the top selling RPG, at least on, I think it was the top selling computer game in Japan for 20 years or something like that. Huge hit, very well loved within the especially in Japan, and it gets the tremendous loving treatment on the TurboGrafx, which seems like the same kind of reverent thing you're talking about. I also think I don't know, I think it might be easy to look back at an Atari 5200 port of, I don't know, Donkey Kong or Pac-Man, and maybe it's harder for us to appreciate how revelatory that would have been to people coming from an Atari 2600, and how it really might have felt like a celebration to them too. But I think I think we had gotten on that topic, and before that we've just been talking about the variety of different ways developers can approach how they want to do a remake.
Well, that actually might be a kind of good segue into, asking what do each of us feel a remake should be, should it, or a remake, a port, or whatever. Do we each feel like those should be entirely new experiences? Should they be more of a reimagining? Would we prefer that they stay as true to the original as possible? Maybe just sharpen up the graphics? And what do we each want from the idea of ports or remakes or remasters?
I don't mind talking first.
Sure.
So, for me, I think there's no one answer. It's going to depend, I think, more than anything else, on my relationship to the original work.
Mm-hmm. I can agree with that.
For me, say Mario 3, for example, for me, the NES version of Mario 3 is pretty much as close to perfect as video games get. And I'm not really interested. I've never really engaged that much with Mario All-Stars because I like the look of the NES originals more. And with Mario 3 in particular, I kind of don't think it should even have a save game. I kind of feel like part of what makes Mario 3 distinct is that it has this huge buffet of levels, and every time you turn it on, you can choose where you want to use the work whistle and what parts of the game you really want to engage with. And adding a save to the game makes it seem more I don't know, you're going to spend time going bit by bit going through every single stage, and it changes my relationship to the game in a way I don't really like. So there are some examples like Mario 3 where I feel like it's perfect the way it is, and I'm not really interested in seeing it change at all. And there are other games where you can kind of see the promise of the game and think like it would be even if I can't imagine how to make it better, I can imagine like a better version of it. And there are cases where, let's say, to take an example of that, like Bionic Commando has a really cool concept, but when I tried to play the NES version, it was kind of clunky in a way that made it hard for me to enjoy, even though the idea of like a platformer where you can't jump is a cool concept. And when Bionic Commando Rearmed came out, I adored it. You know, I didn't play enough of the original to really be able to compare it, but I loved the way they just kind of like tried to reimagine the core mechanics, stick with the plot, stick with like the mission structure, and just build on that. And then there are cases too where I like both. You know, like I like the original Final Fantasy VII, and I like ATB-based Final Fantasy JRPG combat. I also really like the combat system and like voice work and a bunch of things about the Final Fantasy VII Remake, for example. The things I don't like too. But, you know, the point is like the same world, the same concept can be reimagined as something that feels very different to play, but which is also good. So I don't really think there's like a single thing, but it like a single approach that I necessarily like the most. But I do think that it comes down to like how the player, from my perspective, how the player relates to the game and what they want from it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel somewhat similarly. Like, you know, people have talked about how, you know, Capcom has remade, I think, every Resident Evil now prior to 4. And so there has been talk for a little while, you know, are they going to remake 4? And the thought of that is just horrifying to me. You know, 4 has been ported a lot by this point. And I honestly think there's a reason why it's been ported and it hasn't been remade. Because why? I mean, I truly feel like I am not at all interested in seeing Resident Evil 4 remade or reimagined. I'm fine with ports. I'm fine with just cleaning up the graphics. Whereas some other games, maybe I would be made perhaps more open to a remake with some differences. But then again, that's how I felt with Final Fantasy VII. Mm-hmm. And that remake was a betrayal. That it was...
I think we should probably do a whole episode on Final Fantasy VII.
Oh my God. It was amazing. I was having so much fun with it. Then there were some little red flags, you know, when partway through the story. And then get to the end, and it was just trash. And I don't care who that upsets. I don't care who that offends. The ending was trash. And like, obviously, you know, I understand this is just the first chapter of however many chapters we may or may not get. But that's not what I wanted from the remake. And, you know, a lot of people were criticizing people like myself who were not happy with the direction that Square Enix took it. And they're like, well, you know, they didn't really hide the fact that they were reimagining the story. And it's like, yeah, I understand that, but the reimagining sucked. I think part of why reimaginings or remakes kind of make me nervous is because there are things that, like really kind of meaningful moments that can get lost in these remakes. I mean, for example, and spoilers for anyone who has not played or beaten first chapter of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you know, the Avalanche members surviving. That was almost more upsetting to me than even the giant revelation at the end. And I know people don't like seeing characters that they like die. I certainly don't. But it just felt like the remake took what was really meaningful about those Avalanche members' deaths and just was kind of like, oh, look, everyone's still alive. It's so wonderful. And I'm not really sure where that's going to go from here.
Yeah. There is, I think, one specific death in the original Final Fantasy VII. Maybe I shouldn't feel shy about spoiling a game from 1997. But there's one specific death that it would feel, to me, very strange to not have happen. because it seems so pivotal to the way the original story plays out. The deaths you're alluding to, I think I have mixed feelings on those, because I don't know. I don't know for me if it really damages what I like about like the Final Fantasy VII story for those specific characters. But like, I mean, that just goes back to what we were talking about it, like depending on what's meaningful to you or how you end up relating to a game.
Right.
I do think we should have a whole episode praising and trashing both versions of Final Fantasy VII. But
someone here is going to say something about an inappropriate excess of zippers. I won't say who it is.
And belts.
But it might be the only other male here at the table.
He's gotten more restrained about that over time. Let's be fair. Like he hit like a weird peak around Kingdom Hearts, but he's learned some restraint since then.
Kingdom Hearts, they were just like, you do you, and then they're like, oh, never mind.
Yeah.
Oh no, not Kingdom Hearts. Final Fantasy X, where there's an entire character with a dress made of belts and belts. That might have been the peak.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know. Were you trying to allude to Aerith's death earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
Wow, spoiler alert.
I really...
Sorry, I'll put something in the show notes.
There's someone who's like, has their sealed copy. I have been waiting 20 years. I've avoided spoilers for 20 years.
23 years. But, that's one of the things that worries me. I do get the sense that they're probably going to find some way to explore what if Aerith doesn't die. And I think I say that because even though the original Final Fantasy also allows you to kind of choose who you want to romance, either Aerith or Tifa or neither, I just get the sense that they want to explore what if Aerith lives. And to me, that is just it completely misses the reason as to why Aerith gets killed in the first place.
I'm calling it. It's going to be the year 2030. It'll be PS maybe 7 at that point. And we're finally getting the final installment of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Cloud dies.
Oh, man. Oh.
I said it. Remember this in 9 years.
I'm just...
All right, so...
hold on. I'm gonna build... Yes.
You guys both tried very hard to swerve this into an all Pokemon podcast, and now you're trying to swerve it very hard into an all Final Fantasy VII podcast.
I was about to jerk the wheel in a different direction if you'd let me.
Please
Thank you. So
jerk off.
I am making a bit of a U-turn, actually, to swing by to pick up Mario All-Stars again, which we left on the wayside. To what you were saying at the most recent juncture, I feel like, well, in terms of remakes, I don't think there is a right or wrong. Mm-hmm. But what I think was the case with games for so long, and it's the point I was trying to make with the art direction stuff, 2D versus 3D, is that I feel like there was a relentlessly forward progression in the industry of just always what's new, what's quote unquote better. That's what you latch onto. That's what you do. And then finally there was this moment of dawning recognition where developers were like, I don't have to make a game that looks this way just because it's a new system and it can pump out super high-def, ultra-realistic graphics. And, look at what Capcom did with Mega Man 9, where they're like, you know what? Even the PlayStation, Mega Man 8 version of the game, where it had the really beautiful sprite work, we don't even have to go back to that. I can go back and make this game look like it was on an NES.
This that you're talking about makes sense as you're relating to, the visuals of games,
well,
right?
Let me continue.
Because it was clearly PC indie games and then Xbox Live Arcade that kind of opened the floodgates on
yes,
right, retro games.
Well, see, for remakes though, what I'm getting at is if you look at All Stars, Angela kind of talked about this, where it's very much those original games, but then boom, let's add this little quality of life feature because we can. Suddenly you can save the game, which you couldn't do before for any of them, I don't think. Can you save in Mario Brothers 2?
No.
Okay, so all of them, it was you have to just play them. Now, I understand your point of it alters, the feel of the game, but if you think about it, even with some of the older stuff where it's you have 20 different versions of Donkey Kong or whatever, those felt like it was a pursuit to how do we get it as close to the real thing, which would be the arcade version, as we can. then you get to the Super Nintendo and Nintendo doing what they did with All-Stars. Now, maybe to specify, I'm not necessarily arguing they were the first or whatever, because Zack made the point about the East games, but just that Nintendo's sitting there, it's like, we can take it, we could make it exactly the same game. I mean, to Tecmo's credit, that's what they did with the Ninja Gaiden trilogy on Super Nintendo. It's pretty much the NES version of games that are not really prettied up. Whereas All-Stars, Nintendo's like, you know what? We're going to take these 4 games, put them on the system as a compilation, give them prettier graphics or more detailed graphics, and we'll add in this quality of life tweak of let's allow save states. So that was not just, porting, but also making them quote unquote a little better. But as time has progressed, I think what we're coming to find with these remakes is it's like they can serve all sorts of different purposes and functions. Ocarina of Time 3D is essentially, but for a handful of tweaks and UI changes, it's almost identical to the N64 version of the game. Mm-hmm. And someone at Nintendo was like, that game is so beloved and perfect in the eyes of so many people. Let's give a new generation the chance to play it, but let's make it look prettier with the 3D graphics capable on this console. But if later this year, Nintendo does a direct, let's say they do it in June, and they're like, so we're remaking Ocarina again, but this time we're changing the story and giving it new gameplay and whatever. I mean, I don't necessarily know there's a right or wrong approach there. I enjoyed how the 3DS version of Ocarina was so much like the original, but if you came and said, and now we're going to give you a new version that plays differently, I'd be like, I'd be willing to try it, because at this point, really, look at Pokemon. The original games have been remade twice now.
Well, we did. We did with Master Quest. Ocarina of Time Master Quest. We got that different version of Ocarina of Time, even though, it's essentially it's the same story, same, graphics engine, all of that. Master Quest was this interesting, I feel like people don't really talk about Master Quest a lot.
No, it's because it was just that limited release. And I think they...
Limited release, and, it is really just the dungeons that change, but...
Yeah, but it's still, like, it's a different enough version that it's... I don't know, it almost feels like a fan game. It's a very interesting thing that Nintendo decided to do.
I wish they'd kept with it after the original Zelda, because that's something the original Zelda has, is a whole second quest where they change the location of things on the overworld. And blah, blah, blah. Obviously, that would become more expensive to do as you get to... So, anyhow, I don't disagree that there's this variety. I just don't see the progression. I really don't. At any year from 1988 and on, which is when I really became aware of video games, I think you have this variety of ways re-releases or ports or whatever are approached.
The UN Squadron thing again. If they could have one-to-one taken it from the arcade and put it on Super Nintendo, they probably would have. But the Super Nintendo presented a challenge because they couldn't do that. But then along the way of porting it over, they're like, well, let's change this, let's change that, let's do this, let's do that. Yeah. Whereas when you get to later hardware, you have the luxury of kind of doing whatever you want. Whereas these earlier consoles, it was not necessarily the case. Like I said, if you're doing Donkey Kong and you're going from the original Atari to the newest one, it's really just, let's make it closer to the arcade version. But now if you were to remake Donkey Kong, it's like, I can pixel perfect recreate it.
But even your example of Mario All-Stars is one where they weren't fettered by the technology that the game originally had. Super Mario All-Stars does not come close to scratching, the limits of what a Super Nintendo can do. So that doesn't really seem analogous to the UN Squadron example. That's a whole different approach, right?
Well, I said, unless I'm incorrect here, but with Mario All-Stars, they could have just done a one-to-one, here's the original games, just now they're on the Super Nintendo. But they wanted to kind of elevate the graphics a little more, and that's why they're more detailed and all that.
But Capcom didn't have to change the stage layouts in UN Squadron. Capcom didn't have to switch around which bosses were in which stages. They didn't have to add the ability to buy new planes as you're playing through the game. Like, these aren't dictated by the hardware. These are dictated by, like, what if we do something else in the course of, like, porting the game. You know, it's a creative decision, not one that's, like, bottlenecked by technology.
I still don't think I'm making my point clear.
Maybe
so
not.
I'm acknowledging this because it's this concept I'm trying to touch on that I don't know how to say what I'm thinking in my head. It's like you have these games. I mean, like, look at how now we're at the point with, like, a port where take the SNK 30th anniversary collection or whatever it was that came out a couple years back.
Mm-hmm.
That is taking these ancient SNK games and not trying to pretty them up, saying, let's get these as close to the experience on the original platform as we absolutely can. And to the point where you have filters that make it look like it's on a CRT screen. Like, it's a whole different beast. Like, so, like, for example, if you're going to port over Donkey Kong to, you know, the newer Atari, you're not saying, how do we make it look like it was on the last Atari? Like, no, we want it to look better than that. Now we're at a point where it's like the way technology works is it's just very interesting. It's like part of its preservation. Like, that 30th anniversary collection was an act of preservation. I remember talking to, I don't remember if he was the director of the game or not, but he worked for, I believe it was Digital Eclipse that did that porting for that game. And he was just going on and on about how hard it is to do these 2D games on 3D hardware and how they wanted it to just be so, you know, exact and recreate, you know, the original. And it's like, man, you know, this is an example of a port where it's like, I want it to feel like it's on an NES. And, like, that didn't exist decades ago. So it's...
You're talking about, like, kind of like fetishism for or nostalgia for specific old technologies? Because I agree that...
But that's not even necessarily just nostalgia. Because, like, to my point I just made, it's preservation for a lot of people. Because it's like, you know, as systems die...
yeah, no, I know. I know. Like, there have always been preservationists, right? It's just, like, there wasn't the market to make something like this 30th anniversary project a reality because there wasn't a generation of people that had grown up with the Neo Geo and, like, when they were, you know, hanging out in arcades in their early teens or whatever, right? So, like, the market required the nostalgia in order to support that kind of, like, Digital Eclipse enterprise.
Well, nostalgia, but also, you know, authenticity. I mean, it was a very formative podcast for me because I'm speaking for a podcast right now, but I don't listen to them. But I had a phase where I was kind of listening to some gaming podcasts, and I ran across this thing that the Smithsonian had done when they had their traveling exhibit. And the Smithsonian had been talking about how they're preserving games now, and they have, like, these debates among themselves of, okay, if you're playing a PlayStation game, are you really getting the full experience if you're not actually taking a disc, putting it in a PS1, listening to the loading of the disc in the system on a tube TV, watching it and playing it? And I thought it was a very interesting point of debate because they're saying that as time goes by, you know, unless somebody figures out how to mass produce CRT screens again, what we have is what we have, and they're all going to die eventually. And that hardware is probably eventually all going to get to the point where it dies, or you can't play it again on, like, a tube TV. So if you want people to actually play the thing, we can port, like, that 30th anniversary SNK game. But it's like, if I want you to truly feel like somebody in the 90s playing a PlayStation, you have to sit there with the controller, with the system on a tube TV. So, like...
But that... I don't know. I think that's a fruitless, flawed line of reasoning.
Well, it's fascinating because, like, if you think of games as art, somebody going to look at the Mona Lisa, you know, however many hundreds of years ago, you just stood in front of it and used your eyeballs.
Well,
and today it's the same thing, right? Like, I can go look at the Mona Lisa, I'm standing there using my eyeballs. Now, the world around you impacts it, whatever, but just the means of it is you stand, you look.
You can't just whatever that. Like, if you were looking at the Mona Lisa when it was new, like you're some, I don't know, Medici. I don't know who Leonardo painted that for, but like, you're living in a world where photographs don't exist, where movies don't exist. Like, a viewer's relationship to a painting is going to be different.
That's exactly what I was getting at just now. I understand that part of it, but I'm saying the means of ingesting the art isn't any different, is you stand and look at it. Your mental part of it is what it is.
But you can't get away from that, which means the rest of it is just like some academic who cares.
No, because if you think about, like, with the games, so I was in a class and an artist had come in and he works with video. And he's been working with video since the 80s. And in terms of authentically presenting the art, I said to him, you know, the videos that you're showing us of your exhibition work, I go, this stuff was all presented on tube TVs. And I said, now that they're, you know, incredibly scarce, if you wanted to represent your work and have it be exactly as you showed it in 1990 or whatever, I said, if 20 years from now you try to do it and you couldn't get hold of any tube TVs, I go, how would that impact the authenticity of the representation of it? And he said he had never thought of it, but like it kind of started this conversation in the class where the artist is standing there and sort of thinking about how, yeah, you know, I made this, the intention was it's on this tube TV. The form factor of the television itself was part of the presentation. The actual display on the screen was part of it. So it's like ignoring the fact that the Mona Lisa has aged, of course, because that is, you know, it's going to get older. But the idea is you showed this to me on a big old box TV. That's how it was supposed to be shown, this piece of art. It's kind of a unique thing to video and video games where it's like that is going away. And in terms of being able to actually authentically feel it, you, as artist people, it's like you can't really recreate it at a certain point. Yeah. And what does that do for the experience?
Yeah, video games are really interesting in this regard because everybody has their own memories attached to certain games and how they feel about games and why it's important to one person versus another. But Robert brings up this interesting point about how part of those memories are attached to the experience of going from big bulky cartridges to tiny discs on the GameCube, for example. And then having to learn how to use memory cards and rumble packs before rumble was built into computers or controllers, haptic feedback and all that. Having to wrap your controllers, learning little tricks for how to straighten out the cords. Lots of things that, especially younger gamers, they will never understand, they will never know, they will never experience unless their parents or their siblings or their cousins or whoever's in their lives that are significantly older than them still have that stuff. They still have the consoles, they still have the controllers, they still have the original versions of those games. And I do think that with gaming, I do think that part of the experience of actually part of actually experiencing a game as it was meant to be played, I do think there is something to be said for experiencing it the original way.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And like obviously all this stuff does make a difference in terms of how like the user, the player, whatever word you want to use, interprets it. I don't think like it's always going to be compromised. It's always going to be incomplete. None of us are ever like no kid is ever going to be that Nintendo 64 YouTube kid again. Like, right? Because the Nintendo 64 is never going to be the cutting edge thing. Like that kind of excitement is never going to be associated with the N64 again. The world has changed around it. You can't ever go back, right? Even people who lived through it can't go back to it. It's gone. Like these moments, whatever, Blade Runner, Tears in the Rain, whatever the like actual line is, right? Like it's just gone. It's all gone. And like you can do right by yourself by being aware of the way these things affect you. Like if you feel differently when you play a game on a tube TV on a CRT than you do on an LCD screen, then think about that and decide whether you want to play on a CRT. right? And like that can help you like maybe get more out of or stay more connected to. And it's worth thinking about those things. I just think like my point earlier was that like actual authenticity is just never a goal that is ever going to be achievable. You know, like as soon as that subculture changes, as soon as you get older, like you're never going to be able to perfectly recreate that experience. And so like holding that up as a question, like, is this the real thing? It's like, well, no, it's never going to be the real thing. Even if you have an actual Super Nintendo with an actual cartridge and you are sitting on the floor hooked up to a CRT, you're still different because you've had all these other experiences in life.
Well, even Angela too, like we're veering into the emotional part of it. I'm thinking of it purely as an art experience, which emotion is not part of. Just, in terms of the presentation.
Yeah.
Because it's like your intent as the creator, like look at the Mega Man games, because we've talked about like some of these old NES games and SNES games where Square will butcher them because they'll like turn anti-aliasing on. And all of a sudden, the square pixels are now like these blobs because they think it modernizes it. We've discussed how, well, if you're a developer at Capcom and it's 1991 or whatever, and you're working on Mega Man, you are partially designing the graphics thinking, well, once it projects onto the CRT screen, this is what it's going to look like on the screen. And so you design that way because you figure certain things will be hidden or obscured by the screen itself.
But that kind of like I hear what you're saying, and I want to hear like the rest of where you're going. But that like specific kind of thing is addressed by like a CRT filter.
Well, I'll debate you on that. I actually think a lot of the CRT filters I've seen in these games, like they're saying they're trying to look like a TV, but like sometimes I look at the CRT filters and I think, this is what your TV looked like if it was about to die, or you had a crappy TV. Like,
sure.
Like playing. Well, let me give you an example. For those who are not around here, we're in the Bay Area, which we said in the first podcast. But there used to be a video game museum here in Oakland, and they had a bunch of CRT screens set up. And I remember going in, and they had a Harry Potter game on PS1 playing on a tube TV, and I remember looking at it in the museum and just thinking, that picture is so beautiful and crisp. I mean, it's not HD, but it was a particularly good tube TV that they had it hooked into. Everything was still nice and, fresh feeling on that screen. And I'm like, this is what this game would have looked like when it came out. It would have been on a tube TV, and it would have looked this pretty in that moment when it came out. It's like, this was an authentic representation of how that was meant to be, quote unquote, displayed. Because designers aren't thinking of it like artists, even though there's overlap, I think, between games and art. A game designer is not thinking of it the way an artist would be, like this is how it's supposed to be displayed. But really, I think it's very similar. It's like, I'm designing the game, it's going to be on this type of screen, this is what it's supposed to look like. But if you take, like, for example, I remember our cousins, they had gotten it was like a projection TV in their house, and it was like a big wide screen. And I remember they'd hooked, I think it was a PS1 into it. I just remember it was Madden, and everything was stretched and looked super weird because it wasn't meant to be displayed on that giant screen that they had. So it's a similar thing now where, and we're continuing to see it happen, this evolution of when they're porting. Initially, it's like, well, let's just put these pixel perfect images up on the screen, and then you realize something is kind of lost in the translation, and now what do we have? Screen filters. Let's try to make it look like a CRT.
Yeah. I think you can like look at something like that and say, well, to try and consider what the original designers were doing and figure out what the right way to treat it is. And I think like preservationists can have different opinions about even whether like what's the right way to do that, right? And CRT value filters could be like a valid way to do that.
Well, I mean, and then it's it's not 100% set in stone. Let me be clear that that's not what I'm arguing. I mean, I'm of the opinion you need to hear the disc loading, but there are people who are not. And I mean, it's like the Smithsonian. They talk about how if you're playing a ROM of a game, somebody can make the argument that it's not that different than just playing it on the original hardware. But I just feel like again, taking the emotion out of it, that I think there's something kind of cool about, like, if you, whatever emotional baggage, what's happening in the world, ignoring all that, just, I'm going to give you the exact setup you would have had 30 years ago with this hardware and the TV. You get to sit and feel it. Even though, you're going to compare it to other things in your mind, the point is you get to actually feel it presented the way it was supposed to be presented, is a fascinating aspect, because it clearly is impacting now what we're seeing with ports. The SNK collection, it's like, how do we make it feel like it was on that old hardware? A lot of these older game compilations, even the some of the arcade ports that we're seeing now are striving for that feeling of authenticity. And that's something that you arguably wouldn't have had as much obsession over 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So that's what I kind of mean, like, where it's evolving. Because now it's like, how do I port this over for the sake of making money or just getting it to run on this console? Now you have, it's like, how am I going to port this so that the old geezers in the crowd can be like, it looks just like it did in 1989.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like, I don't know, I don't think you can cut emotion out of this. Or to put it another way, I don't think you can put the stuff that the player brings to the game out of it. Because, like, ultimately, I think maybe more than any other medium, like, games are about the interplay between, like, the human mind and what the computer is, like, doing, and like that feedback loop, right? And so, like, if you change the contents of even just the human mind, you've completely changed.
This is pure presentation, my friend. It's like putting the same drink in different glasses.
Yeah, but, like, presentation doesn't matter except as interpreted by the viewer, right?
Well, but you're also forgetting that it's also kind of about what you're even capable of. It's like the guy who did all the installation art with the videos he would make and the TV screens. He might have used flat panel screens back then if they existed, but that's all he had. And there was no emotion that went into it. It was just, these are the TVs I can use.
Yeah, I think we need to, again, keep in mind the Smithsonian was asking from the perspective of preservation and also just the experience of engaging with that game on its original hardware. I don't think, at least just given from what Robert said, I don't think the Smithsonian was asking from an emotional perspective. They were just merely asking from a game preservation perspective. And from that point of view, emotion doesn't play into it. Nostalgia doesn't play into it. It's just simply asking, in order for our purpose here of game preservation, is it important for us to, I don't know if they were planning on making any sort of, like, interactive installments, or if they were just talking about from the perspective
another point of debate.
Or just saving, making sure they save hardware and they save all the components and everything needed to play those games. Because it's one thing to just, it's like with movie preservation, and I don't want to get too far off of games here, but with movie preservation, I don't know if they really care so much about, like, do we want to have, like, 50 different versions of this movie? Because so many movies, old movies, for example, have been released in different formats. Do we want to have the DVD? Do we want to have the 4K version? Do we want to have the VHS? Do we want to have the blah, blah, blah? Or is it just more about, we have a version of this film, we have the highest quality version of this film that we've preserved? Whereas with games, because they are so much more interactive, and that interactivity has changed over time based off of the available technology. The Smithsonian, unlike, for example, film preservationists, they have to figure out, is preservation, does that involve not just saving a copy of the game, the source code or whatever, but actually making sure that these games could still in the future be played on their original consoles with the original controllers, with a memory card or a rumble pack or whatever else needed to be used. And to the film preservationists who might be listening, if I didn't know what the hell I was talking about just now, forgive me.
I was thinking that's its own can of worms. Somebody right now.
Somebody like, there is.
Let me tell you, sister.
Yeah, there is, in fact, every single version of the movie saved.
One thing real quick about, like, nostalgia, too. somebody who's 10 doesn't have nostalgia, which is one of the things I've always found funny about Nintendo criticism is it's like people will say, well, it's just nostalgia that keeps people playing. And then they'll simultaneously say Nintendo games are just for kids. It's like, well, the 5-year-old's not going to be nostalgic about a game that came out 30 years ago.
No, so, but those could be like the two parts of their audience. I don't really think you've like managed to like, you know.
Well, but still my point is that nostalgia is not going to factor into it for people as time keeps going by. You know, it's like if you go to the Oakland Museum, they have multiple displays. Some of them are meant to be like period pieces. It's like, I'm not going to feel nostalgia for the 1930s. But to me, sitting in that space that they've recreated is more about just like, if you were in this world in this moment, this is what that world felt like.
Doesn't that kind of worry you though? Like in 30 years, there aren't going to be SNK 30th anniversary collections because people won't have grown up with playing Neo Geo in the arcade.
Well, it's no different than other media. I mean,
we'll still be alive,
that's what I'm saying.
In 30 years.
No, I know, but like that's what I'm saying. It won't be different than other media. Like think of like all the movies that have kind of like been forgotten. Like some have survived over time, but most of the stuff that came out in like 1976, like who cares? Who even remembers? You know what I mean?
It's so ironic we're talking about this. Our dad was talking about Augie Tribeck, who was at the Coliseum drive-in theater promoting his movie. Oh man, I'm not going to remember. Ground Zero. And man, we tried to look it up. You couldn't find it. If you did, there was like a sentence. And then if you tried to look up poor Augie, it was just like blank. But like, I mean, there's a different. We're kind of talking different things at this point, though, because it's like,
yeah, well, we're talking about remakes, and now we're talking about like preservation.
Hey, this is how our podcast will be. It's loosey goosey.
I'm like, hey, you're the one who's like, hey, we're talking about different things here. It's like,
well, no, but I mean, like the idea of things being lost. I mean, that's inevitable. I mean, the people who are going to want to play the 30th anniversary SNK collection, I don't know how many copies that game sold.
But I don't just mean like literally lost. I mean the whole like digital eclipse style thing, like lovingly packaging games from 30 years ago, right? Like that can only happen on a commercial level because there is an audience of moneyed people who 30 years ago developed those attachments with this game.
Well, that's the content. But what the games are, the point is, if I give you a CRT tube, a type of console that would have hooked into it, the controller, it ultimately doesn't matter what the game is or the console. The point is, if I want you to feel like this is what playing a game in 1990 was like, there's a certain way you have to do it to give the authentic experience of it. Whether you're playing Mario Brothers 2 or some random-ass NES game that nobody even remembers now, that part of it is sort of irrelevant, because then you're talking about the game and whatever, but this is, like I said, it's the experience. It's that thinking in art terms, how it was meant to be displayed. That is a different sort of beast right there. Because if you're Digital Eclipse, you make that 30th anniversary collection, you could technically take any games and use the mold that they created. And 20 years from now, the next collection will be something else, but they're maybe setting a standard for this is how you do it. Because that particular collection got a lot of acclaim for the way that they were able to make it feel authentic. And I think that these studios are continuing to advance that. Like, I'm waiting for the point where somebody shows me a CRT filter and I'm like, okay, that really does look like it was on a tube TV, but
it'll happen. Like, as you were saying, like you said you had seen a CRT filter like that. It just looked like a CRT that was on its way out. Right?
Yeah.
But like, if you think about like the actual experience of being in a household that had a TV back then, some of them were less good than others, you know? Like, so like, it's not even that one is less authentic from that point of view, right?
And somebody's just like, man, I remember my TV was going to die and this is what it was like.
Or we had a really shitty TV and it looked just like this.
Did either of you ever use or have any experience with like the portable TVs that were like that big?
Oh yes, every summer.
Have you ever like hooked a video game into one of those? Not the best experience.
Well, that, it's interesting you say that too, because again, talking about ports, right? I remember with Super Mario Brothers Deluxe on Game Boy Color. So they ported over the NES Mario Brothers onto that screen. And I wish I had it in front of my face right now. There's something off about it. It's either the aspect ratio or something is zoomed, but it's not exactly like on a TV playing the original Mario Bros. And I remember it was bothersome to me because my brain, there's certain games where like the muscle reflexes will never go away. And that game screwed with some of my muscle reflexes because the proportions weren't right.
There are, I think, like there's in different emulators, there's like a square pixel mode versus like a more like true to classic TV mode. So like, yeah, I've definitely noticed that too, where something's like, hey, that's a little too wide, or, that's a thing.
The ports of everything in the SNES and NES catalogs for Nintendo Switch Online, I hate that you can't turn those damn borders off on the sides. It's this stupid gradient that they do where I think it's like black and then it's like dots and maybe gray on the sides. I hate it. It's like, I want the aspect ratio and I want nothing next to it.
It's progress, man, because like...
it's reversed because the Virtual Console didn't have any borders.
No, I know. But I'm like comparing it to like, I mean, I don't know if your parents do this, but this is a thing that people's parents do of just like they get an HD TV and then they're like, well, how come it doesn't fill the whole screen? And then they stretch all the images to like fill the entire screen, or they zoom in so it fills the entire screen and cuts out the top and bottom, right? Like, it's really frustrating. Like just visiting a house where that's happening, it's like, do you not see how fat that guy's head is?
I was thinking about like Wind Waker HD, or other games, like especially because Robert just brought up the Virtual Console. I like when games get ported, and they still reference like old button like the original button configurations, for example. Or like Wind Waker and the Tingle Tuner, which looked like a Game Boy Advance because that was the handheld at the time. I like when those things get kept in versus updated to, match the current controller setup or whatever. And obviously I understand why they do that, why they will, if it says like to press A and A on the screen is no longer, like the blue or the green or whatever it was on the N64 controller. And now it's like just a black A or something like that. But I do like those references that get left in, just because it does play a little bit to the nostalgia of when you originally experienced that game.
Wind Waker is an interesting remaster, port, remake, whatever you want to call it. I think hopefully over the course of this conversation we've had, it's clear that there's so much bleed between things. It's like, is this a remaster? Is this a remake? Is this a straight port?
Do you like the art in the Wind Waker?
I was just about to say, I still like the GameCube versions better. And I'm not saying that Wind Waker HD isn't timeless. I'm sure it will be, but because Wind Waker on GameCube didn't go as hard with like trying to knock your socks off with like look at the lighting in Wind Waker HD. It's gorgeous and it looks super realistic, but it runs a little contrary to the idea that this is a cartoon. Like cartoons don't have super hyper realistic lighting.
Lens flare.
They can now.
Yeah.
Now they have 3D cartoons, but
I feel like GameCube, like if you took the original Wind Waker and you just pumped it up to HD and made it crisp, it would still look stunning today.
I've seen it. You can play it, and you're not wrong.
We'll get into Mr. Pirate here eventually.
That is not who I am. I'm just saying the technology exists. You can find video evidence online of what this looks like.
That was the cat. In case you heard the
cat's
cat.
being bad.
But I definitely prefer Wind Waker HD because of like the quality of life stuff, like especially as it relates to sailing. But
see, and that's interesting because now we're talking gameplay versus aesthetic, and that's because I like the tweaks too. Like I don't dislike them, those quality of life things that you're talking about.
But I definitely prefer like the flatter lighting in the GameCube version. I don't even really think it's particularly close call for me aesthetically. Yeah, I think we're getting close to 7 minutes, so I don't know, maybe like real quick, if anyone has any like worst remake you've ever played.
Worst remake.
Mm.
You know, I have a thing. I love seeing stuff on multiple consoles, and not to dip back too much into what I was saying before, but like another interesting thing about the modern systems we have is that I can have the straight up original game on my system and have this remake or remaster as well. Like, to me, it's fun, the different takes, but I'm trying to think of one I actually straight up hated. I know you're not fond of Twin Snakes. I love that version more than the original, but I also didn't grow up with the original. Twin Snakes was the first time I played the original Metal Gear, quote unquote.
You know, I actually tried Twin Snakes before I tried the PlayStation version, and even still, it was like, it's like, oh, well, now I understand why people like this game when I tried the PlayStation version. Yeah, and obviously nostalgia can be a factor in a lot of cases, but in that case, for me, it wasn't.
I guess maybe Super Mario Bros. Deluxe would probably be one that I don't particularly care for.
Yeah.
One that I think is an inferior version of the game, but it's still fun to me, is the version of Donkey Kong Country that was remade for Game Boy Color. I wish they had done all 3 games. It was pretty cool seeing how they managed, because I loved the Donkey Kong Land games. So this was kind of like the Donkey Kong Land games on steroids because it was color.
Yeah.
But man, it was so cool. It's like, how did they manage to, you know, it looks pretty dang similar to the Super Nintendo version and runs really well.
It might be like worth another topic of conversation, like specifically ports to less capable systems and like how they change things and how they manage to make it work. Angie, do you want to bag on Final Fantasy VII again?
Yeah, I feel like I would maybe need a longer amount of time to think of all of the ports or remakes I've played, but yeah, I mean, Final Fantasy VII is a very hard act to follow. For Square Enix is who I'm referring to there, and it was quite a task, a pretty gargantuan one. It would have been a task to just remake that game straight. To reimagine the game was something else entirely. And there are parts of that game that succeed very, very well. It's beautiful. The combat is incredibly fun. But then there are parts of the game that are just... it might be a little juvenile to just say it's stupid, but it just, that's how I was kind of feeling when I was playing it. It was like, this is dumb. From the more major things like really significant story changes to more minor things like kind of annoying newer characters, and then little things that I think are more. This is more of like a me thing. It's a more of a personal thing, but like the materia. How you find, the summons in particular. In Final Fantasy VII, you're finding summons in the overworld, and I just think it's kind of cool. You're finding these incredibly powerful entities, gods, whatever you want to call them, and you find them in the middle of the snow, like in the middle of a blizzard. For example, you find them in these random places in the overworld, and they feel
Titan in like a ruined reactor.
Yeah. You find them in these mysterious, interesting places, and it kind of makes you wonder if you're thinking about this. This is why I said it's maybe more of a personal thing for me. Maybe you're kind of wondering, why is it there? Why is it in the middle of a reactor? Why is it in the middle of a blizzard? Yeah. Where did it come from? And it feels more, ethereal and mysterious and almost creepy, depending on which summon it is. It felt so incredibly anticlimactic and sterile to have to get summons from that.
Chadley. His name is Chadley.
That stupid.
But just be like, you need to do a few more chores to unlock a simulation mission.
A simulation mission to fight this summon, to then capture this summon like a Pokemon minus the Pokeball.
Yeah.
And it was just so bland, so sterile.
They were in a tough position.
An insult to Final Fantasy VII and Pokemon. And so that there were a lot of little things like that disappointed me, and some more significant things. And like I said, I mean, like Zach said, it should really just be its own episode.
I do think it should be like Final Fantasy VII and its remake.
Yeah,
I think are an interesting topic.
Yeah, but So for just without spending too much time thinking about it, I will settle with Final Fantasy VII Remake is my answer.
I will say that I don't even think the Final Fantasy VII Remake, certainly not top 5 worst remakes Square Enix has done.
Maybe not.
They've got a pretty long rap sheet when it comes to screwing this stuff up.
Wasn't what was that? What was like Secret of Mana or whatever? Is that the one that came out recently?
Yeah.
It had that like new kind of weirdo art style that people kind of bagging on. I think because I think I remember being at what's it called? PAX West in like 2017, and I think that was on the show floor.
That might have been. They've remade the first Mana game twice. First as Sword of Mana, and then as Adventures of Mana. Then they remade the second one, Secret of Mana, and then they just, I want to say last year, they came out with a remake of the third one, Trials of Mana. Trials of Mana is actually pretty good. All the other remakes are atrocious. Sword of Mana might get my vote for the worst one. They just took what was like a really, really wonderful, simple...
I'm sorry, which one?
It's called Sword of Mana. It was a Game Boy Advance remake of the Final Fantasy adventure, or the first Seiken Densetsu, which has like, a lot of Game Boy games. I think I used this word to describe a Game Boy game last time we recorded, the Link's Awakening.
Are you referring to maquette?
No, thank you for that. No, but like it's like weird and melancholy, like the original Final Fantasy adventure, and a lot of games on the original Game Boy have this strange tone because they're essentially like black and white, and not even that, like this weird sickly green. It's kind of like weird, like kind of ghosting as things move on the screen. Like all this stuff does, I guess, to connect to your point about like the way like the original technology and presentation can change the way you feel about something. Like, so you weren't going to be able to like replicate that perfectly on a Game Boy Advance, no matter how hard you tried. But like they went for just like a much like sunnier, charming version with like a lot of like dialogue and cutesiness, and it just.
I'm going to amend my response. Those Dragon Quest remakes on Switch, I don't know if I'll ever actually finish any of them. No. They're like garbage mobile games.
they literally are. They're mobile games.
So let me give you this. So this is burned into my brain. What you were saying about like the Game Boy version of the Mana titles. I remember playing the remake of Ocarina, and one of the things that it's such a small thing, but it makes such a big difference, is the font of the dialogue and text in Ocarina and the way it scrolls. That makes a huge difference in terms of feel. Because fonts alone impact how you react to certain things that you're reading. But if you play any of the original versions of Ocarina of Time, whether it's the cartridge or the GameCube disc, whatever, the text scroll was used to suggest tone sometimes, or pace of speech. So like, I think when the Deku Tree is dying, there's multiple times in the game where you see like one letter at a time appearing slowly.
Yes.
And then in the remake, they don't. Yes. Zelda. And they didn't replicate any any of it.
Is it just like
in the new one?
One text box by text box.
Yes, and that's a huge change.
Right. That is stupid. Like, that's incredibly stupid because it's, again, the technology at the time, there's no voice work. You're just reading text, and the text is scrolling. And in some cases, it's auto scrolling. You can't skip ahead with A or whatever. Yeah, I mean, to choose to take out the pauses there completely changes how you are interacting with the story, how you're reading it in your head. It's a ridiculous. I don't understand that. And I was actually just thinking of something. Ports often take out glitches.
That's one thing that made Ocarina special was they reincorporated glitches on purpose.
But not apparently with Majora's Mask 3D. I was reading about this.
Oh, okay.
So you know the glitch where you can access Seikon's hideout at any time?
Oh, well, that was I think maybe there's a different level of glitch because, like Ocarina, you have Link's spin when, like, in the Goron's lair, where that big jar, and you see the young Link.
Because I think the reason why they probably took out the Seikon glitch, because if I'm remembering correctly, this might just be with actually the Fierce Deity, because there's that glitch too. But I think if you talk to people after doing the Seikon glitch, it can freeze your game. Yeah. Yeah, and so that that might have been why they took out that glitch, because it was an actual sort of game breaking glitch.
That's fair.
But still, I mean, your experience with playing the original version of Majora's Mask on the N64. And remembering doing the weird rolling at the door at just the right angle to get into that hideout, and then not being able to experience that.
Yeah, obviously, like that kind of like glitch stuff is like changed over time. Maybe that's worth a conversation at some point too. But I was going to think of like Final Fantasy VI actually had two versions when it came out. There was a glitch in the original version of Final Fantasy VI, aka 3 on the Super Nintendo, where if Realm used her sketch ability on an invisible enemy, it could do something crazy and like fill your inventory with a bunch of random weapons and items in the game, including like some of the most powerful stuff in the game. Then there's a revised version that Square put out after that doesn't have that, but like, if you grew up with the original version of the game, you can have some like pleasant memories of like exploiting that particular glitch. And
like, the missing number glitch in Pokemon Red and Blue, for example.
Well, here's something to think about in terms of these remakes. It's kind of a two-part thing, but like if you're an artist and you do a sketch of something or the outline of it, there are so many times you will move your pencil a certain way and it looks just right. And then when you go to put ink over it, you can never recapture the fluidity and energy of that initial placement of the line. I think there's something comparable there between games where it's like, so I'm going to remake this and either remove something or correct something, or like with the art style of a game. Like, well, so I know we keep talking about Ocarina and some of the same games on over, but they're good examples.
Every week, it's going to be Ocarina.
So Ocarina, I think they're so full of crap when they were saying, this is what it looked like in our minds. This is what we wanted the game to be.
Yeah, the 3DS one?
Yes, the 3DS one.
No, I don't believe that. Not based off of the concept art.
Yes, and then if you just look at Ocarina, now the characters, I think, are partially limited by just what you could render, and especially because it was like an earlier game on the N64. But my point is that the visuals in that game were hyper realistic for the time. Like, that sunset is still one of my favorites in all video games.
Yeah,
it was meant to look realistic. Then you get to the 3DS version, and I think it's a beautiful game, but it doesn't capture that feeling.
Not at all.
At all.
No.
And I sometimes wonder, like, was that a mistake that they didn't try to make it more to touch upon the realism they were going for in the original version of Ocarina of Time? Or like the mana game that you hate, like, to them it's like, well, this is an interpretation of what those pixels are supposed to look like. It's like, yeah, but it's way too different. Like, you've totally lost the spirit of the original.
Yeah. I will say, we should probably wrap up, but you're dead right about the Dragon Quest mobile versions. Like, every mobile port of a classic Square game that Square Enix has released, like every handheld Square Enix game since like 2007 has just had the most hideous fonts. They used to have just gorgeous UI in all of their games. It was something to honestly look forward to, like especially the classic Final Fantasy with like that signature like blue menu, the white pointer hand, and like the white border on the menus, and even when they got adventurous with like the later games, it's gorgeous. And like everything that they've put out on mobile and things they've ported from mobile to other systems looks so cheap and so tacky. The sprite work too, but like even just the fonts are so telltale. It's frustrating.
Yeah, today, Zack, I believe, is the one who sent this into our group chat, talking about how Sony has closed down its Japan offices, or they're in the process of it. And they were saying how they want to focus on these globally targeted games versus games targeted for just like the Japanese market. It's a similar thing to me of just sort of like you're losing what actually makes it special. Mm-hmm. Like this game, so many games that are just for the Japanese market. I mean, how we've learned as time has gone by. Look at Switch and how it's not region locked. Mm-hmm. They're like, you know what? Whatever oddball Japanese game you want to play, if you can read it, you go make your account, download it onto your Switch, and you have fun. Mm-hmm. The idea that it's like, oh, we need to focus on something that's more for the international market. It's like, well, then you're losing what makes you special. It's like, I want to play the weird stuff that you think only Japanese players like. It's like, that's what makes it entertaining. Like Loco Roco was listed. Stuff like that. It's like, can you imagine if the Japanese market just suddenly was like, we're not making anything that is Japanese-centric mm-hmm. or Japan-centric anymore. Mm-hmm. It needs to be global-centric. It's like, you've officially screwed up.
They're losing the plot, but this is the consequence of moving their offices not just to the United States, but to California. I'll leave it at that.
We are going to call it, speaking of losing the plot.
Yeah, I could talk about this for hours.
But you won't.
Zach's going to go to bed. We'll just keep going, me and Angela. Well, how about briefly just end with, so what is your favorite remake? I don't think we talked about that.
No, we didn't explicitly talk about that.
Or port, whatever.
Yeah. I don't know if I want to, commit to marry this opinion for all time, but, honestly, the Resident Evil 2 remake is impressive in how, I don't know. Maybe it's not a good answer because I never really got into the original PlayStation Resident Evil games, but I came to, I'll try to make this brief. I came to Resident Evil with Resident Evil 4, the more action-focused ones, and I don't really scare that easily, so horror games that aren't action thriller type games tend to fall a little flat for me. I got bored playing Resident Evil 7, for example. And so Resident Evil 2's remakes really could have been a game that I just didn't really care for because it is more horror focused than the action focused games that came out in the previous generation. But I found it super tense, super thrilling. The puzzle solving and kind of solving each larger space really worked for me. And from reviews I've read or videos I've watched about the original, the reason I'm saying I don't know if it's a great answer for favorite remake is because I just don't have the knowledge of what the original was. But regardless if it's a relationship to the original version, I think it's a near masterpiece. It's a really good. So I'll probably go with that.
I think for me, same that I'm not sure if I want to commit to this answer 100%, but Pokemon Leaf Green. I have a lot of good memories and my childhood was filled with Pokemon. And I feel like Fire Red, Leaf Green, especially the graphics, they are very reminiscent of the original Game Boy graphics, but, with a modern updated look, but not super, over the top modern and very different. And it was just nice having this upgraded version of these games that I really loved and really helped define my childhood. And if you're maybe wondering why Leaf Green over Fire Red, it was because I have red, blue, and yellow. I knew that green came out in Japan, and we didn't get green in America, and so I started playing green, and so that was the one that I spent most time with and beat completely, and so yeah.
I think I have way too many in my head to go through. But one, it's a trio that are just kind of distinct in my mind at this moment. I loved the ports of the Donkey Kong trilogy on Game Boy Advance. that was purely because I could take Donkey Kong Country anywhere. And like that trilogy on Super Nintendo, they're three of my favorite games of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I can play them endlessly. So to actually get them in my hands, I was like, oh, this is just way too cool. I had this weird period, like late high school, early college, very early college. It's more just late high school, where I was not paying attention to Nintendo Power. And there were a bunch of Game Boy Advance games that had come out that I just didn't realize existed. And during that time, I'm pretty sure that's when I realized, hey, wait, all the Donkey Kong Country games are on Game Boy Advance. So that was just like, oh, give them to me. This is amazing. I can play them anywhere.
All right, well, I think we're going to wrap up there. Thank you for joining us on our second episode of 7 minutes. This is so far an hour and 35 minutes, so we met the 7-minute threshold.
Yeah, we kept our promise.
All the time we have to spare.
Yeah, and we'll get better at this intro outro thing. But
don't make promises you can't keep.
All right. Thank you for joining us.